Assemblymember Berry, and it relates to private renters.
Can I thank you for your question, and I know your personal interest in this matter. We know that more and more Londoners are finding housing harder and harder to afford. And for those Londoners who rent privately, that's particularly the case. Over the last 8 years, rents have increased by nearly 3 times average earnings, meaning that even Londoners on very decent incomes are struggling to pay their rent, never mind save for a deposit. We need to be building thousands of new and affordable homes every year to help Londoners who are renting privately. We also need to be honest that making housing more affordable is not going to happen overnight. But my team has been working with councils, housing associations, developers, investors and Londoners themselves to get started on this goal. We need to build homes of every type, and we need to make sure as many of them as possible are affordable. That's why we're aiming to publish new planning rules in the autumn to make sure new developments include a decent proportion of affordable housing. Those affordable homes will include ones for shared ownership to help private renters buy their first home, and new homes for a London living rent, a rent based on a third of average household incomes to help give private renters a rent they can afford and that enables them to save for a deposit should they wish to do so. Beyond concerns over affordability, the lack of security for private renters can also make life difficult for many tenants, especially the growing numbers of households with children living in rented homes. Furthermore, most landlords offer their tenants a good service. Although most landlords offer their tenants a good service, a minority of landlords are letting their tenants down with poor quality service and conditions. My predecessor launched a landlord accreditation scheme saying he wanted to do something about poor standards. But despite a target of accrediting 100,000 landlords by 2016, fewer than 2,000 new landlords were in fact accredited through it. In contrast, I want to develop well thought through and meaningful approaches that will actually help renters. That's why my team are developing plans to name and shame rogue landlords, and why we're supporting local authorities to crack down on bad landlords through properly enforced landlord licensing schemes. Many boroughs are already doing great work in this area, and I'll support their efforts when they do so. For example, I've recently written a letter in support of Redbridge Council's application for a licensing scheme to tackle criminal landlord behaviour in key areas within the borough. Their scheme needs government sign-off, and I believe the government should support boroughs like Redbridge, where their schemes are well evidenced, light touch and easy for good landlords to register for. Although my powers are limited in the private rent sector, I'll continue to work with councils to improve conditions in the sector, to make the case to government for London to have greater powers, and to work with all partners across the capital to build new and affordable homes to rent and buy.
Okay, well, thank you for that answer. I mean, that is quite a lot of work that you're doing. I am very concerned about private renting, and I asked private renters to tell me their stories and their concerns in my recent survey. Over 90% of them who answered me had experienced not one but 4 serious problems in the past 3 years, or 4 or more serious problems in the past 3 years. A huge majority of them want better information about their rights and a way of looking at bad landlords and letting agents. And I'm pleased to see that you've still got plans in train. You mentioned them to me briefly at the last Mayor's Questions for a database of rogue landlords, I think you called it. So can I ask, will this include letting agents who break the rules? And will you commit to collating the information that's in the borough schemes and from other sources and putting it online in an accessible way as soon as possible?
That's what we're working on, a portal to do just that. And we're taking advice. There's issues around data protection and stuff, and there's issues around defamation as well. We're exploring all those difficult things, but that's the ambition.
Do you have a timetable for when that will be launched?
I asked that very question, and I was told the answer, which I will share with you, which is... I'll find it shortly, I promise.
The clock is on me, I think.
I can drop you a line if that helps, Sean. I did ask that question. We have got an answer to timelines.
Okay, maybe I can move on to the question of costs, which you also touched upon. The London Living Rent, the New London Plan, they do bode quite well for new homes. But as you touched upon, under your predecessor, the previous mayor, costs of rent in existing homes went up absolutely hugely. I think the average rent went up from £1,190 a month in 2011 to £1,452 a month this May. So what plans do you have to make sure private renters in homes that have already been built will not face continued high increased rent costs over the course of your mayoralty?
Well, I've got no control over the rents that private landlords charge already. I'm not sure if you're suggesting retrospective rent control powers, but those powers don't exist. What we can do is try and stabilise rents in either new properties. The good news is many local authorities and others are building PRS homes, private rented sector homes. They're good landlords. They give longer term tenancies, between 3 and 5 years. But during those tenancies, the rent only goes up by inflation. There are examples across London of PRS homes being built by local authorities and by private developers. But as far as those who rent from a private landlord is concerned, you'll be aware we have no powers to get involved in that.
I'm disappointed to hear you won't be trying to get further powers in this. I mean, your London living rent, you know, it will work. It won't do any harm. But even if you manage, say, 50,000 homes out of the 200,000 that you plan to build during your mayoralty, that will only help 5% of those in the current PRS sector. So what I'm hearing is that you're not offering anything on cost to the other 95% of us living in homes that already exist.
It's really easy to be a megaphone politician with no influence. But the government was elected, and I respect the fact they were elected on a manifesto different to mine in 2015. I was elected on a manifesto different to theirs in 2016. We've got to come up with a deal. And the reality is, in the real world, you know, what I'd want to do is not necessarily the same as what the government wants to do, so we've got to come up with a compromise. We're having good discussions with the government in relation to a package for London, with the CLG and with the Treasury. Once we've got an announcement, once we've got a decision, I'll be happy to announce that. But I'm realistic. This government is not going to give the Mayor of London the powers over rent control or rent stabilisation for those properties already in the private market. This government's not going to ban letting agents in London as they do in Scotland in relation to the tenancies fees they can charge. So we've got to be realistic and stuff in relation to what's achievable and stuff. I want the best deal possible for Londoners, and I intend to do that.
I really, really hope there is 4 years of your mayoralty almost to go, and I really hope this won't be the end of
at least 4 years.
Moving on to helping renters to help themselves. Really significantly, I think, 6 out of 10 renters told me that to join an independent London-wide renters organisation, they would be prepared to pay a small fee. This is something you currently do have the power to do. It's an organisation that could become self-sustaining over time. So will you consider providing perhaps start-up funds, perhaps practical support such as office space for an organisation like this?
Well, I looked into some of the plans that people have considered for example, a renters' union. And I looked at what sort of things a renters' union would do: provide assistance and support to individual renters, stabilising and supporting local groups of private renters, establishing a database that would include rogue landlords. And while I support many of the aims, I'm not convinced that we should prioritise resources towards setting up a new structure, since many of the aims are done by others. Shelter, for instance, provide advice services. Generation Rent is organising a local renters group. And here at City Hall, my team is developing options for a database of rogue landlords. So, you know, unless I'm persuaded that, you know, there's something to supplement, I'm unclear what this money would go towards doing that's additional to what Shelter, Generation Rent and we're going to be doing.
Well, I'm out of time, Mr Mayor, but just to say I hope you will agree to meet with some of these groups to think about how you might help them to expand. But I'll leave it there, Chair. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you very much. The next question is from